Hi, my name is Krista Bruton, and this is my Module 3 assignment. Okay, so the first theory that we kind of addressed was uses and gratifications. This is just essentially the idea that audiences are purposive, goal-oriented, and active communicators. It studies media processes, and it kind of addresses the idea that people satisfy their needs through vehicles they choose. So essentially, this is kind of a graph. I know it's hard to see, but this is a graph that just kind of shows some of the core concepts of uses and gratifications. It deals with media attributes, needs, kind of going into uses, and the context of use to achieve the gratification or an effect, or I guess to fill the gratification. The next idea is cognitive dissonance, which addresses an individual's need to keep a mental balance when they're experiencing uncomfortable or psychological unbalance. So essentially, when individuals experience dissonance, they seek to kind of remove this with consonance. So there's some ways they can change their behavior to reduce dissonance. They can either add a new behavior or change an existing attitude. As well as people tend to also avoid situations that increase dissonance. So the reading kind of addressed this idea that donors that donate for a cause, like during the tsunami, they experience a lot of cognitive dissonance. So in order to kind of alleviate or relieve themselves from this, then they'll donate to a personal cause, and they'll kind of restore that they'll kind of get psychological relief from this. So this is just an example of a pig and a cat, and I know you can't really read it from there, but it simply is just, it says which pet, would you want to eat? And so it has a little kitty cat and a little baby pig, and it kind of makes people stop and think, well, I eat bacon, but I mean, I would never eat a kitten. So again, it's trying to create a sense of unbalance mentally so that there will be, this sense of dissonance, so that I just thought was a really cute example. Selective exposure is the next topic, and it's just kind of the idea that people purposely seek information that matches or reinforces their existing viewpoints. Again, it kind of refers to the idea that in a group, if you're in a group, especially a political group, there's not really a lot of room. A lot of people especially don't really want to, they don't want to disagree with the group theory. They kind of, they usually enjoy support, especially when it deals to like the reading that said that partisan selective exposure leads to higher levels of polarization, which in politics, especially if you have a really strong political affiliation, you definitely want a group of supporters, and you don't look for that, disagreement or that argumentative aspect. It also kind of deals with the idea that people avoid communication that represents disagreement, so it kind of does lead to like a more enforced polarization. So this is kind of a little example that I picked out. I know it's kind of hard to see again from there, but it says, CNN, Republican debate, and this little guy says, "Put it back, Frank, it doesn't stand for credibility." So this is just the idea that if you're Republican or conservative, you're probably not getting your news from CNN. Again, kind of supports this idea that the more support that you get on your perspective, especially dealing with political affiliation, it's going to create even more polarization, towards this. So, a little application to the future. So basically what I thought is that knowledge of where your target audience goes to get information about your company is always going to be important. I mean, especially knowing what platforms your audience goes to in order to seek information, you need to know this, because when you're creating a message for a client or an organization, like, you need to be able to reach them, or especially your target audience, you need to be able to connect with them. Again, having an understanding of what's going to create dissonance in future donors, especially if you're working for a nonprofit, is essentially important, because a lot of nonprofits' funds comes from donors. And so if you know how to tap into kind of their cognitive dissonance, which I know seems a little strategic, but knowing how to really pull that emotion and kind of create that imbalance to retrieve donations is obviously going to contribute to your overall success. Okay, so entertainment is kind of the next section of readings. Entertainment is pretty much just media content consumed for the purposes of leisure. So entertainment can be used for all kinds of things. seeking social connections, learning about new phenomena, or even, gaining information about something new. It can be in any type of content, dealing with books, television, even dancing. It can do anything. Entertainment uses really varies among individuals. People seek entertainment to solve problems, to escape, or even, to have some emotional relief throughout their day. I know that I'll watch soap operas when I want to just have a hormonal emotional release that day. Um, Mood management theory, again, kind of addresses this idea that people are going to arrange or alter their environments to meet their needs, whether it be, they're feeling sad, so they're going to watch a sad movie, or, this theory specifically addresses that it's going to reinforce a positive mood. So it's kind of the idea that, I'm in a great mood, and I'm going to skip around, so I'm going to play some upbeat, really happy music to kind of reinforce that behavior. And then transportation. So transportation is kind of this idea that when a reader is transported into a text, play, or movie, that they use imaginative resources that kind of remove them from reality. So essentially, it's like getting lost in a story or getting lost in a book. It can have very powerful emotional and persuasive effects on this person. Participatory responses was an interesting idea that I noticed in one of our readings. It just kind of, it refers to the fact that if you're really transformed into a film, or, if you're really into a really good TV show and you're kind of responding for that character. So an example would be like if the hero is if a villain is sneaking up on the hero and you can see it, so you're like, oh, get out of the way, get out of the way. It's almost like you would respond as if you were actually experiencing that situation. So another aspect is just joys of escapism. When you're transported into something, it kind of takes you into this new world. And a good example would be Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. It's kind of like you get to leave your own reality for a little while to seek enjoyment. So I thought that was really neat. And then just the idea of automaticity, which kind of referred to this idea that we don't necessarily have control over how transported we get, especially in really disturbing documentaries, or for me personally, American Horror Story. Sometimes I don't like that I get so into it, but I can't look away. So just this kind of idea that you can't really even necessarily control when you're transported. These are just kind of little pictures of being lost in a book, or, like me and my boyfriend constantly do. We sit in front of Netflix and just, really indulge in a story because we can't stop watching it. So as far as the Moyergus educational entertainment messages, this just kind of is the incorporation of health and educational messages that are being placed into entertainment media. So some aspects that are involved with this is involvement with characters. So this I thought was really neat because it can include, an example of how you can get involvement with characters to kind of, expand knowledge to your audience is that TVs can teach about risks and responsibilities that accompany sexual activity by showing experiences of characters that engage in sexual activity that young adults can actually really identify with. So it's just this idea that people learn vicariously through observing models. And the Slater Extended Elaboration Likelihood Model, it just kind of, it also addresses entertainment education. It also addresses the idea that you can be persuaded from the content and narratives. Another way to kind of really reach that audience. The degree of engagement with the narrative is going to depend on your individual self-interest in the actual narrative. So, you'll kind of have to have an idea of what your audience really, really, does engage with. So an example is if the needs and goals of your audience, represent relationships, well, then you're going to want to include identification and, relationship with characters into your narrative in order to fully reach and kind of get this response from your audiences. So some application to the future. I think that it's really kind of important to address your target audience's desires and needs regarding entertainment, identification, and narratives. It will create success. So an example of this for me could deal with the social cognitive theory. Let's say that I'm my organization, or I'm working for Texas Tech, and we post a video of Cliff Kingsbury planting a tree on Earth Day. So our kind of hope is that when our target audience, watches this video, this is going to hopefully either persuade them or at least have an impact on their behavior to go and do this because they can really identify with Cliff. So priming is the idea that an outside stimulus we experience will affect our later behavior. Some examples of this theory could be explained as if, someone sees a guy helping this old lady carry her groceries to her car, then later on you decide, oh, that was so great. Like, I'm going to go, or I guess later you could decide, I'm going to help this crippled lady cross the street because I can tell she's having trouble. Well, this kind of relates back to that you were primed by seeing someone else act altruistically, so you kind of feel the need to act altruistically. And then strength or intensity of a prime can be manipulated. It's just going to depend on the individual. So concepts also may trigger each other, like the word family may trigger, further concepts in your mind of, community or social responsibility. Just this idea that it's kind of a process of each concept. So the limited capacity model was a little more complex, but essentially it's a data-driven model developed to investigate real-time processing of mediated messages. This kind of spoke to me like, the model kind of consisted of a few things: motivated cognition, the toolbox, which consisted of a bunch of different concepts, but essentially it had a measure of the message and a measure of the media user. I also kind of noted that resource allocation was kind of the heart of this theory, and that resource allocation can either be, automatic, or it can be more long term. But it's this idea that humans will kind of access resources, whether they be long term or short term, compared to whatever information they're, processing, and they'll use these resources to kind of better understand and process the information, whether they need controlled or automatic resource allocation. And then cognitive effort kind of represents the total resources allocated to message processing. So emotions. Emotions are essentially internal mental states that represent evaluative and balanced reactions to events or objects. So discrete emotions dimensional emotions kind of address arousal and valence, whereas discrete emotions kind of refer to thought patterns, and cognitive appraisals. And then this kind of also goes along with mood management theory, which I kind of addressed a little bit earlier, but just this idea that people will alter or arrange their environment to either, reinforce existing behaviors or existing, moods, or even, to change a mood. Like, an example would be, if I'm sad, maybe I'll watch, like a sad chick flick, essentially to that extent. And this is just kind of a little picture of a baby who's in a really good mood, is listening to, music to enhance that mood. So as far as mediated relationships goes, the book kind of touches on two really good ones. Parasocial interaction is more as kind of like having a partner in the relationship, but it's not, physical. It's definitely more symbolical. So a really good example I thought of this was when Kidd Kraddick passed away. And a lot of people felt like they were losing, a really good friend. Like, they really looked forward to listening to his morning shows in the morning. And essentially they didn't have like an actual relationship, but it was very symbolic. And they felt like, someone who was really important was leaving them. Whereas identification is kind of the idea of walking in someone else's shoes. It really kind of addresses, you kind of forget your role as the viewer and just kind of merge with the character. So an idea, or I guess an example of this could be, role models or your parents, or even like dressing up for Halloween. If you dress up to someone that you really, really, identify with, like you see yourself as this character, could be another one. Okay, so then application to the future for this is, maybe my company that I'm working for uses a famous spokesperson that my audience really identifies with to further connect with them and hopefully change their attitudes or behaviors on this, on some sort of aspect. And I guess my goal would be to really, really connect with them, and since they identify so closely with the person that I chose, that hopefully it will, achieve our goal. Thank you.